Okay, and we have Rachel Broide with us. Hi Rachel, how are you?
Good, Zohar. How are you?
I'm great, thanks. Well, and I had to call you back the second time this week because yesterday was so dramatic in the Knesset. So let's start with the basics. I know that on Wednesdays the Knesset vote on legislation proposals, and typically the coalition, which has the majority of the votes, promotes its own legislation while blocking the opposition's proposals. What happened yesterday?
So basically, in the opposition, there is a party called Yamina, which is essentially a right-wing party, and they put forward legislation that would create a parliamentary oversight committee on conflicts of interest on Supreme Court justices and other judges as well. And this put Likud in a very difficult position politically because, on one hand, they promote judicial reform, and on the other, they have to get along in the coalition that they created. So
So,
there
so
was a lot of
basically, so
chaos.
basically, Likud went at least during the campaigns with the flag of the reform in the judicial branch, but now there was a proposal about that they couldn't support due to coalition agreement.
Correct. And they also just couldn't really support it because I wouldn't say it was illegal due to the coalition agreement. It was just, it wasn't politically feasible with the other coalition partners, whether it's the ultra Orthodox parties or blue and white. And given the fact that there are some members of Knesset within Likud that didn't support it, it just wasn't politically feasible.
So, what did Prime Minister Netanyahu want to do about it? Did he want to promote it or not to promote it?
So it's hard to know exactly what the prime minister wanted. He did not attend the vote, and he did not vote at all. I think most people are saying that he didn't show up because he is under indictment and under investigation. It looks very suspicious if he's promoting a bill that's promoting oversight on the very judiciary that he's now facing in his charges. But I think that within Likud, there was a lot of chaos. At the beginning of the day, it was, we don't support it. Then it became, we will allow members of Knesset from Likud to vote along their conscience. And then it became, we will vote for this bill, where more than a third of the MKs did not show up.
It
So
was
it,
even a physical chaos, right? I saw people
right.
going in and out all day.
Yeah, I mean, besides the fact that there were four members of Knesset who could not vote on the bill, either because they had some type of conflict or they were in quarantine or something like that, just so many members of Knesset didn't even know what was flying, that they didn't know where they needed to be, what time the vote was going to take place. It just was not a coordinated effort at its, par excellence.
Right. So that was Likud. What happened in blue white in that time?
So blue and white is against all bills that will promote judicial reform, simply because they feel that right now, putting aside Corona, but that when the prime minister is under indictment and facing criminal charges, judicial reform cannot actually happen. So they're against anything that will even slightly affect how the courts will act, just given the nature of the current political structure.
So
So
it's
they were
so
against it.
they promote a status quo. Actually, they want to
Correct.
keep everything as is. And actually, the Minister of Justice is from blue and white. That's Avi
Correct.
Nissenkorn, right?
Yes.
Okay. So what happened eventually? How did it end up?
So what ended up happening was that this vote went up uh, for a vote in Knesset, and it failed to pass, meaning that Likud could not bring enough votes. The coalition was very split, and it created this immense uh, frustration and tension between the two main coalition parties, Blue and White and Likud, with Blue and White even threatening to go to elections over this. So it created this just, I would say, mini blow up within the government. And I think they'll be able to recover from it because I think both sides have very little to gain from elections. But it was a very, very tense few hours.
So it looks like by the way, I think we're hearing that from Likud Knesset members all the time that this coalition is not very functional, and that there are hurdles just every few steps you get to a new one.
I mean, I think that's clear just from the very fact that we have 36 ministers. I mean, there's just a limit as to how much you can get done with so many cooks in the kitchen. But I think that if every time everything becomes an ultimatum, there's so much tension. Ultimately, we're going to be at elections, whether it's in 6 months or a year and 6 months. It'll be very difficult for this government to last its term.
Right, but we have heard a lot of criticism from the public saying that the current crisis is so deep, and what we see in the Knesset is a charade of things that are not related in any way to the economy or to the situation of the labor situation in Israel or to the health situation in Israel. They are dealing with other things. It seems like many people think they're just disconnected to what's going on.
Yeah, I definitely think that there's a lot of frustration in the public. I think that's also natural in a population that has gotten used to having 3 to 4% unemployment, and all of a sudden we're at 20% unemployment. I think it's natural to look to their leaders and be frustrated and be disappointed. And I think that some of that criticism is fair. You know, we didn't expect Corona, and therefore the government couldn't plan for something like this, and therefore there's going to be mistakes along the way. There's going to be a learning curve, and unfortunately the public and the government pays a price for that learning curve. And so I think some of the frustration is natural and expected, and I think that, you know, the government lost a little bit of control with how they relate towards each other, which is just creating even more chaos and more unknown. And the public is stressed out. They don't know some people don't know where their next meal is coming from. They don't know when they're going to go back to work. Nobody knows when the bounce back is going to be or what it will look like. And that unknown leaves people very, very stressed out.
All right, let's go to another issue that became relevant nowadays, and that's the expected immigration increase due to the corona. Is Israel preparing for it?
Israel is preparing for it. Unfortunately, it's going to take many steps to actually prepare. It's not just about the influx of immigrants with regards to housing. Israel has space. It's also about what do you deal with the influx of educated and relatively affluent people that are coming, and they're going to be expected to be employed in similar positions. And so that's, on one hand, that's a good thing because Israel has a shortage of doctors and other fields. So it would be good to get this influx of very well-educated, mostly European and Americans. And on the other hand, there are changes that need to be made with regards to regulation as to how to accept and properly, I would say, assimilate these immigrants. And the question of will that take place and how quickly can that happen? Because the worst thing that Israel can do is take in all these immigrants and then lose control and have even more people unemployed and more frustration and having to, you know, pour out more welfare. That is something the state of Israel cannot afford. So they are preparing, but the question is how will that implementation occur and how quickly can Israel learn from its previous influx of immigrants and how will that work out?
All right. And finally, let's go back to politics and the budget. Prime Minister Netanyahu and the alternate Prime Minister Gantz met, I think, twice already. What have they accomplished so far with regards to the budget?
So there's been very little progress with regards to the budget. What makes things even more complicated is that the Prime Minister at this stage wants a 1-year budget and the alternate Prime Minister wants a 2-year budget. In the coalition agreement, they agreed to a 2-year budget, but at the time of the agreement, neither of them expected the corona situation to go on for this long, and they didn't know how it would play out. That tension is just going to keep going. So it's very interesting. And then the other, I think, politically unique aspect here is that the leader of the opposition, a member of Knesset, Yair Lapid from Yesh Atid, supports a 1-year budget. So alternate Prime Minister Benny Gantz can't even rely on his previous political ally to support a 2-year budget. So it's been really interesting to see how this plays out, because if it goes to a vote, in the Knesset, with 120 members of Knesset, it's unclear exactly how it will play out and what the final vote will be. So that's, I think, a huge unknown here. And again, that's creating a lot of tension in the government. Can they get a budget passed? What will it look like? Can they get a 6-month budget passed? Can they get a year budget, 2 years? Nobody knows. And as of now, the prime minister and the alternate prime minister have met a few times, and there's been very little progress in that area.
Mm-hmm. Where the other members of coalition stand with regards to the budget?
I believe that the other coalition partners will follow Likud, but they have also not formally announced their positions. So previously, the ultra-Orthodox parties have preferred 2-year budgets, but now
they are they need a two-year budget because a lot of the special budgets that go to their communities are not automatically distributed, so they prefer, I think, to do it once every 2 years. Makes it easier for them. But I'm wondering, I know that the Ministry of Finance officials are, at least a few of them, said that they are opposed to a 2-year budget. They want a 1-year budget. So are they taking into account they don't have a vote, so they can only express their
professional opinions. So, I mean, the Finance Ministry has generally supported a 1-year budget. It's more economically efficient. It allows for adjustments to be made from year to year. It's much more efficient. It's easier to plan. But politically, of course, Blue and White wants a 2-year budget. That's how they can ensure the things that they promised on their campaign trail get done. But if
and ensure that the rotation takes place. I think that's the most important part.
Correct. So what's happening now is they're fighting it out. And if we can't get a budget passed, we will automatically go to another round of elections. So again, both sides really don't want elections. Both sides cannot afford to go to elections with a 20% unemployment rate. They can't go to elections where they can't function because of Corona. How will polls look like? How will people that are in quarantine be able to vote? What about the medical situation? There's too many unknowns and too many risks to go to elections again. So I think ultimately they will come to an agreement, but exactly what that will look like will be very interesting.
Well, Rachel, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
Know what's happening in the Holy Land. Newsreel gives you the latest news feed from Israel. Follow our live coverage of the topics that interest you.
Well, let me update you a little bit about the news, what's going on here in Israel. So first of all, let's start with the IDF. The IDF announced on Wednesday the cancellation of a general military exercise in which mobilization of about 10,000 reserves and thousands of combat soldiers was planned. And the IDF spokesperson stated that the reason for the cancellation, which Chief of Staff Aviv Kochavi decided upon, was budgetary. According to the estimates of the IDF, canceling the exercise will save tens of millions of shekels. The Ministry of Finance officials denied that they pressured the IDF Chief of Staff to cancel. Now, the General Staff exercise was scheduled to take place in September as part of the annual training routine. The exercise was intended to test the IDF's ability of transition from routine to war in a multiple theaters scenario. As part of the fight against the epidemic, the IDF decided to significantly increase manpower in IDF laboratories, testing for corona, to increase the number of hotels made available for corona patients, to increase the assistance of the home front for elderly, disabled, disadvantaged neighborhoods, etc. So they postponed it. Now, the IDF officials believe that in view of the rise in infection rate which we are currently experiencing, the health system will consider the possibility of transferring more authority to the military home front directorate. Now, Minister Yuli Edelstein was quoted saying the exact opposite. So there is kind of a battle there, an internal government battle between the health ministry and the IDF. Each one wants to be in charge of dealing with this crisis as much as possible. Now, the cabinet approved the nomination of the first Bedouin ambassador of Israel, Mr. Ismail Khaldi, who grew up in the village of Hawaled, is the first Bedouin in the history of Israel to be nominated as ambassador. He will be Israel's ambassador to Eritrea. Prior to his nomination, he served in Israel's consulate in San Francisco and in Israel's embassy in London. Now, I have something I owe you from the previous daily talk, and that is the speech of Menachem Begin in the Knesset. So now will be a good time to watch it. This is an amazing example of how the opposition leader should behave.
כבוד היום בשם האומה כולה לצבאנו, לרמטכ"ל ועוזריו, למפקדים וחיילים, אשר הוכיחו כי אומנם כן, חודש דור המכבים בימינו. מבקש אני לומר שלכולם הזכות, אבל ראש ממשלה הוא ראש צוות, ואולי בזכות הניסיון שהיה גם בחיי, יודע אני שראש צוות בעוד כולם אחראים שם על שכמו עוד טיפה אחת של אחריות. ומי יודע איזה כובד לטיפה הזאת. לכן היום אומר לראש הממשלה בשם האופוזיציה, השקפותינו שונות, אנו נמנים על מחנות שונים. בבית הזה החופשי עוד בוודאי יהיו ויכוחים בינינו, יסודיים, רציניים, אולי אף חריפים. אבל היום הזה בכל ליבנו נאמר, ראש הממשלה, כל הכבוד.
Wow. So just to give you a little bit more context for this video, for this speech, this was taken in 1976, a few days after the what is called Operation Thunderbolt, or the Entebbe operation, where Israel sent 6 airplanes in order to free and return home 106 hostages that were taken by Palestinian terrorists, Palestinian and German terrorists. The IDF's elite unit actually took over the terminal in Entebbe, Uganda, and freed the hostages, and they were flown home. 102 were freed. Unfortunately, 4 were killed during the operation, and 2 IDF soldiers were also wounded. So this is the speech of the opposition leader, of Menachem Begin, in the Knesset after this whole operation succeeded. And even though he was in the opposition, and even though he knew that Rabin, the prime minister, Yitzhak Rabin, was his political rival, he knew that the right thing to do is to salute Rabin for his commitment to freeing the hostages. And I haven't seen another opposition leader that behaves like that ever since. All right, so that was my due to you from the previous daily talk. And now, today in history, well, today is the 7th of the Jewish month of Tammuz. This is the date in which the walls of Jerusalem were breached just before the destruction of the Second Temple. About 3 weeks later, that all happened in the year 70 AD. Now, since all the Kohanim, the Jewish priests, were called to fight the Roman army, There was no one left to sacrifice what is called the constant sacrifice that was done daily since the establishment of the temple. On that day, it stopped, and it was never restored. Now, in Judaism, this day is a day of fast, a day of prayer for the restoration of Jerusalem as the capital of all people of faith. This painting that you can see right now by the Scottish painter David Roberts is called The Siege and Destruction of Jerusalem by the Romans under the command of Titus, 70 AD. It was painted about 170 years ago, oil on canvas. It's a large painting, 53 on 77 inch, and it is held in a private collection. Now, you can clearly see in the middle of the painting, you can see the valley of Kidron, and on the opposite side of the valley on Kidron, you can see Temple Mount. Now, the breached wall is the northern wall of the city, and even though the painting is not historically accurate, it is relatively geographic accurate. So the location of Temple Mount and the Valley of Kidron and the walls that were breached and all the walls of the city is pretty much the way they are today. So if you look at the picture from, let's say, from Olive Mount or from Mount Scopus towards the city of Jerusalem, that is more or less the view that you will see, and that is amazing. 2,000 later, that it looks more or less the same. The sacred place are the same place, and the walls are the same place. That is just amazing. So that is today in history, 17th of Tammuz. Now let's go for a quick Corona update. So Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu held a meeting with Health Minister Edelstein today in regards to restricting areas in Israel with high rates of infection. The restricted areas include Modi'in Illit, Bet Shemesh, and parts of Jerusalem. All of these are actually located in the central part of Israel. We can see, as I told you before, the current situation doesn't look good. We're more or less on 1,000 new infections per day, and the number of tests actually was, well, it fluctuates, but it was reduced from 20,000 a day to about 10,000 a day. Now it returned to about 20,000 a day, but still the infection rate stays around 4 to 4.5%. And that doesn't look good. Everyone in the government is talking about starting the curfew once again, shutting down the economy once again, even perhaps for a short while, just in order to regain control over the situation. So that is the Corona situation currently in Israel. Well, that is all I have for you for today. But I have another favor to ask. If you are watching us, if you want to be a part of the show, I've posted on Facebook a request. I am wondering, what is your most valuable place, the place that you most like in Israel? I want you to prepare a short video, 60 seconds, explaining about who are you, where are you from, and what is your favorite place in Israel. Send it over to me. I'd love to see it. I'd love to share it with our audience. In addition, feel free to continue sending us comments, ideas, and requests. As always, I will see you here on Monday for another daily talk. And until then, have a great weekend, and God bless you all.
What's happening in the Holy Land? Newsreel gives you the latest news feed from Israel. Follow our live coverage of the topics that interest you.